I never thought I'd have to defend my own tools from theft in broad daylight. But there I was, watching my neighbor walk out of my garage with my $5,000 worth of equipment, claiming it was community property. Little did they know, they picked the wrong garage to mess with. My name's Thomas Anderson, but everyone calls me Tom. After 25 years working as a master carpenter, I'd built a reputation as the guy who could fix anything. My garage wasn't just a garage. It was my sanctuary, filled with tools I'd collected over decades. Some were passed down from my father, others I'd saved for years to buy. Each had a story, each had a purpose. I'd moved to Oak Ridge, a quiet suburb of Denver, with my wife Linda 3 years ago. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Mature trees, lining the streets, decent-sized lots, and what appeared to be friendly neighbors. Our two-story colonial needed work, but that's exactly what I wanted. Linda got her dream kitchen, and I got my dream garage, a spacious 3-car setup with enough room for my woodworking shop. The previous owner had been a mechanic, so the garage came with built-in cabinets and a professional ventilation system. I spent months organizing everything just right. My German-made table saw centered perfectly, lathe against the back wall, and every hand tool arranged on custom magnetic strips I'd installed myself. That garage was my pride and joy, my retirement project space, where I planned to finally build all the furniture designs I'd sketched over the years. The neighbors seemed impressed at first. Bob Martinez, the retired teacher next door, would often stop by to admire my latest projects. Even Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who lived 3 doors down, commissioned me to build her a custom entertainment center. Everything was peaceful, productive, and exactly how I'd imagined retirement would be. That all changed the day Susan Cooper moved in across the street. From day one, something was off about her. She'd stand in her driveway, coffee in hand, staring at my garage for hours. When I'd wave, she'd quickly look away. Then came the questions, innocent at first, or so they seemed. "Tom, that's quite a setup you've got there," she'd say, peering past me into the garage whenever I had the door open. "The HOA should really consider making that a community workshop. You know, for everyone's benefit." I laughed it off initially. After all, these were my personal tools, many irreplaceable. The idea that they'd somehow become community property was absurd. But Susan was persistent, and soon she had Karen Mitchell's ear. That's when the letters started arriving. The once peaceful neighborhood of Oak Ridge was starting to show its true colors. After getting the first set of letters from the HOA about my garage taking up too much space and creating noise disturbance, I knew something wasn't right. What bothered me most wasn't the complaints. It was how they were worded, almost, as if someone had been monitoring my every move. One Tuesday morning, I was in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a cherrywood rocking chair for my daughter Emma's nursery when I heard voices outside. Susan Cooper was standing in her driveway with Karen Mitchell and Steve Rogers, pointing at my garage and gesturing animatedly. They didn't notice me watching through the side window, but their conversation carried across the quiet street. "It's completely unfair," Susan was saying, her voice sharp with indignation. "He's got thousands of dollars worth of equipment in there, and he barely uses half of it. The community could benefit so much if we had access." Karen nodded, her clipboard tucked under her arm like always. The HOA bylaws do mention shared community resources. Maybe we could find a way to reinterpret certain clauses. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people were actually discussing ways to force me to share my personal property. Tools I'd spent years collecting, maintaining, and in some cases, inheriting from my father. The very idea was absurd. The next day, a certified letter arrived from the HOA board. It detailed a new community resource sharing initiative that would require residents with excess capacity in tools and equipment to make them available for neighborhood use. The letter specifically mentioned my garage as a prime candidate for the program. I immediately called Bob Martinez, who'd been living in Oak Ridge for over 20 years. "Have you ever heard of anything like this?" I asked him, still staring at the letter in disbelief. "Never," Bob replied, his voice grave. "But Tom, you need to be careful. Karen and her group. They've been getting more aggressive lately. The Thompson family 2 streets over, they had a beautiful vegetable garden. The HOA forced them to tear it out, claiming it was unsightly. They didn't stop harassing them until they moved." I thanked Bob for the warning, but I wasn't about to be intimidated. That evening, I drafted a formal response to the HOA board, citing property laws and making it clear that my tools were personal property, not community resources. I sent copies to every board member, including Susan Cooper, who'd recently been appointed as the Community Resource Coordinator. The response came faster than I expected. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my garage door. It cited unauthorized commercial activity and excessive storage of industrial equipment as violations of HOA guidelines. The fine, $500 per day until the situation was remedied. Linda was worried when she saw the notice. "Maybe we should just sell some of the tools," she suggested quietly. "It might not be worth the fight." But I couldn't do that. These tools weren't just pieces of metal and wood, they were my legacy. The craftsman table saw had been my father's wedding gift to me. The hand-carved mallets were from my grandfather's workshop. Each tool had a story, a memory attached to it. I decided to install security cameras around the garage that weekend. Something about Susan's intense interest in my workshop made me uneasy. I set up 4 high-definition cameras with night vision capability, making sure every angle was covered. It seemed paranoid at the time, but my years as a carpenter had taught me one thing: measure twice, cut once. Better to be over-prepared than caught off guard. That preparation would prove crucial sooner than I expected. The following Wednesday, while Linda and I were at our daughter Emma's piano recital, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Someone was trying to enter my garage. The live feed showed Susan Cooper, along with Dave Peters and Rick Thompson from the HOA Enforcement Committee, attempting to pick the lock on my side door. They were wearing official-looking badges and carrying clipboards, as if that somehow made their actions legal. I called the police immediately, then rushed home, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Susan and her accomplices had managed to get inside. Through the security camera app on my phone, I could see them taking inventory of my tools, checking serial numbers and making notes on their clipboards. When the police arrived minutes later, Susan tried to claim they were conducting a routine HOA inspection. But the security footage told a different story. The officers were particularly interested in the lock-picking tools they found in Dave Peters' pocket. As they were being led away in handcuffs, Susan turned to me, her face red with anger. "These tools should belong to everyone," she shouted. "You're being selfish, hoarding all this equipment when the community needs it." I stood in my garage that evening, after the police had gone and the neighborhood had quieted down, looking at my father's old workbench. The thought that someone would try to take these things, these pieces of my history, under the guise of community good, made my blood boil. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The security footage of Susan Cooper and her HOA cronies attempting to break into my garage spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, the story had made its way to local news outlets, complete with clips showing them fumbling with lockpicks while wearing those ridiculous HOA enforcement badges. But Karen Mitchell wasn't about to let her authority be questioned. The morning after the arrests, she called an emergency HOA meeting at her house. I wasn't invited, of course, but Bob Martinez was there, and he filled me in on everything. According to Bob, Karen spent the entire meeting spinning a narrative about how I was endangering the community by running an unlicensed workshop in a residential area. She claimed the break-in was actually an emergency inspection, prompted by concerns about hazardous materials storage. The most absurd part? Some neighbors actually bought it. The next day, a petition started circulating through Oak Ridge. Titled Community Safety Initiative, it called for mandatory inspections of all garages and workshops, with special emphasis on equipment that could benefit the neighborhood as a whole. The language was careful, legal-sounding, but the intent was clear. They wanted control of my tools. I decided it was time to fight back properly. I contacted James Wheeler, a lawyer specializing in property rights, who'd helped my brother with a similar case in Arizona. He took one look at the security footage and the HOA's documentation and grinned. "They've given us everything we need," he said, spreading the papers across his desk. "Breaking and entering, attempted theft, harassment, and all of it documented on your cameras. But here's what's really interesting." He held up the HOA's original charter.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
There's nothing in here about community property or shared resources. They're making it up as they go along. While James worked on building our case, the harassment escalated. Every morning brought new violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. Excessive tool storage, unauthorized equipment maintenance, non-standard garage organization. The fines were piling up, but James advised me not to pay them. They'd be part of our countersuit. Susan Cooper, out on bail, pending her breaking and entering charges, started hosting weekly community workshop planning meetings in her living room. Through her front window, I could see her using a projector to show pictures of my garage, pictures she must have taken during the break-in attempt. The sight of my personal space being paraded around like some kind of community center made my stomach turn. Then came the vandalism. First, someone poured sugar in my truck's gas tank. Next, the garage door was spray-painted with the words, "Share the Wealth," in bright red letters. The final straw? They superglued all my garage locks. One night, nearly trapping me inside when I went to work early the next morning. Each incident was caught on camera, but the perpetrators wore hoodies and masks. Still, it wasn't hard to guess who was behind it. The timing always coincided with Susan's planning meetings, and the vandals seemed to know exactly where the cameras were positioned. Linda was terrified. "What if they come after the house next?" she asked one night after finding our mailbox filled with printed photos of other community workshops in different neighborhoods. "Maybe we should just move." I understood her fear, but this was about more than just tools now. This was about standing up to bullies who thought they could take whatever they wanted under the guise of community good. Besides, we had an ace up our sleeve. What Susan and Karen didn't know was that James had been quietly gathering testimonies from other neighbors who'd been similarly harassed. The Thompson family with their vegetable garden, the Ramirez forced to paint their house a specific shade of beige, the elderly Johnsons who'd been fined for having a medical ramp installed without HOA approval. Each story painted a picture of systematic abuse of power, with Karen Mitchell and her inner circle using the HOA as their personal enforcement squad. But the attempted theft of my tools, that was their biggest mistake. One morning, as I was documenting yet another batch of violation notices, a knock at my door changed everything. Standing on my porch was Mike Wilson, one of the HOA board members, looking nervous and clutching a manila envelope. Mike Wilson's hands shook as he handed me the manila envelope. "I've been documenting everything," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder at Susan Cooper's house across the street. Karen and Susan. They've been doing this for years, in different neighborhoods. This isn't their first time. Inside the envelope was a goldmine of evidence, emails, meeting minutes, and detailed notes about what Mike called the Community Resource Acquisition Program. It turned out Susan Cooper had pulled this same stunt in 3 other neighborhoods across Denver, always targeting residents with valuable equipment or property she deemed beneficial to the community. The documents revealed a pattern. Susan would move into a neighborhood, quickly gain influence in the local HOA, then begin targeting specific homeowners. The tools were just the latest in a long line of property they'd tried to seize through intimidation and manipulated bylaws. They tried this with a contractor in Maple Grove last year, Mike explained, pointing to a specific email chain. Guy had a woodshop almost as nice as yours. They harassed him until he sold his house at a loss. Then they auctioned off his equipment through the HOA, claiming it was abandoned property. The most damning evidence? A private HOA board email thread discussing how to legitimize the seizure of personal property through carefully worded bylaw amendments. Karen Mitchell had even consulted with a shady lawyer about how to make it all appear legal. I immediately called James Wheeler and arranged a meeting. When he saw Mike's evidence, his eyes lit up. "This changes everything," he said, spreading the documents across his conference table. "This isn't just harassment anymore. It's organized theft under the color of authority." Mike agreed to testify, but he was terrified of retaliation. "Karen has connections in real estate all over Denver," he explained. "She's ruined people who crossed her before. We promised to keep his involvement quiet until we were ready to move forward legally. That night, I made copies of everything and stored them in multiple secure locations. If Karen and Susan had done this before, they might try to destroy evidence once they realized what we had. I wasn't taking any chances. The next morning, another violation notice arrived, this one different from the others. It announced an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss the immediate seizure of hazardous workshop equipment from my property. They were planning to move against me, and soon. I called James immediately. "They're getting desperate," he said after reviewing the notice. "They know Mike's been talking to you. This is their last grab for power before everything falls apart." We decided to let them play their hand. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at Karen's house. This time, I was invited, or rather, ordered to attend. But we had a surprise waiting for them. As Karen Mitchell stood in her living room, preparing to address the gathered neighbors about my dangerous and unauthorized workshop, the doorbell rang. Standing on her doorstep were 2 police detectives and a representative from the district attorney's office, armed with search warrants for both her house and Susan Cooper's. The look on Karen's face when she realized what was happening, that her whole scheme was unraveling, was something I'll never forget. The detectives spent hours going through both houses, emerging with boxes of documents that corroborated everything in Mike's envelope and more. It turned out their operation went deeper than anyone suspected. They'd been running this scheme for nearly a decade, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood across Colorado, using HOA authority to force people out of their homes and seize property. They'd successfully stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and property, all under the guise of community improvement. As the detectives led Karen and Susan away for questioning, Bob Martinez walked over to where I stood watching. "You know," he said quietly, "I always wondered what happened to Jim Kelly's tools when he moved away last year. They said he donated them to the HOA, but something felt off about that." I looked at him. "Jim Kelly, master electrician?" Bob explained. had a beautiful setup in his garage, almost as nice as yours. They targeted him right after Susan moved in. Within 2 months, he was gone. They sold all his equipment at their community auction last fall. The implications were staggering. How many others had they forced out? How many people had lost their livelihoods, their hobbies, their passions to these predators? The courthouse was packed the morning of the preliminary hearing. News of the HOA property theft ring had spread, and dozens of past victims had come forward. James Wheeler had spent weeks interviewing them all, building a case that would expose the full scope of Karen and Susan's operation. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. Mike Wilson's documents formed the foundation, but the real impact came from the victim testimonies. Jim Kelly, the electrician Bob had mentioned, took the stand first. His hands trembled as he described how they'd forced him out of his home and stolen his livelihood. They started with small fines, he testified. Then the violations got bigger. When I couldn't pay, they put a lien on my house, said they'd remove it if I donated my equipment to the community. I had no choice. I needed to sell the house to take care of my sick wife. One by one, similar stories emerged. A plumber from Boulder, a mechanic from Colorado Springs, a retired machinist from Fort Collins. Each had lost thousands in tools and equipment to Karen and Susan's scheme. They'd move in, manipulate the HOA bylaws, then target anyone with valuable equipment. The prosecution revealed bank records showing how they'd profited from their community auctions. The equipment, supposedly donated for community use, would be sold to private buyers, with the proceeds funneled through shell companies Karen had set up. They'd made over $500,000 in the past 5 years alone. Susan Cooper's lawyer tried to paint her as a misguided community activist, someone who truly believed in shared resources. But the evidence told a different story. Police had found detailed dossiers in her home computer, documenting potential targets across the Denver metro area. My garage had been next on their list. Karen Mitchell's defense was even weaker. She claimed ignorance of the illegal activities, insisting she was just following standard HOA procedures. Then James Wheeler produced the smoking gun, recordings from my security cameras showing Karen instructing the enforcement team on how to pick locks and disable security systems. During cross-examination, the truth about their operation became clear. They'd started small, targeting elderly homeowners with valuable tools they rarely used. When that proved successful, they expanded, becoming bolder with each victory. The HOA provided perfect cover. Who would suspect community leaders of running a theft ring? The evidence from past neighborhoods was damning. They'd successfully targeted over 30 homeowners in 5 years, stealing nearly $1 million worth of equipment. They'd perfected their method: move in, take control of the HOA, identify targets, then use escalating harassment until the victim either surrendered their property or moved away. What they hadn't counted on was someone fighting back. My security cameras had caught them in the act, and Mike Wilson's conscience had finally forced him to expose their operation. The case was airtight. The district attorney didn't waste time. Karen Mitchell and Susan Cooper were charged with multiple counts of conspiracy, theft, fraud, and racketeering. Their enforcement team members faced lesser charges in exchange for testimony. The preliminary hearing lasted 3 days, but the judge's decision was swift. The case would go to trial. As we left the courthouse that day, Jim Kelly approached me. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I gave up and ran. You stood your ground. Because of you, they can't hurt anyone else." But the criminal charges were just the beginning. James Wheeler had been busy preparing civil suits on behalf of every victim we could find. The HOA's insurance company, seeing the writing on the wall, was already talking settlement. That evening, I sat in my garage, looking at my father's old workbench. The tools that had sparked this whole ordeal were more than just equipment. They represented something fundamental about property rights and personal dignity. Karen and Susan hadn't just tried to steal tools. They'd tried to steal people's passions, their livelihoods, their connections to family heritage. Linda brought me a cup of coffee and sat beside me. "I was scared when this all started," she admitted, "but I'm proud of you for standing up to them. How many other families lost everything because nobody stood up before?" The next morning, as I pulled into my driveway after getting breakfast, I noticed something different about Oak Ridge. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood was gone. Neighbors were out in their yards, talking and laughing. Without Karen and Susan's influence, the community was healing. The trial began. On a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day where justice felt possible. The prosecution opened with our security footage, playing frame by frame as Susan Cooper and her accomplices tried to break into my garage. The entire courtroom watched in silence as they fumbled with lockpicks, their HOA badges glinting under the security lights. What happened next shocked everyone. The prosecution revealed a series of text messages between Karen Mitchell and a local auction house, discussing the upcoming acquisition of my tools, messages dated weeks before the break-in attempt. They had already arranged to sell my equipment before they even tried to steal it. Then came the financial records. James Wheeler had followed the money trail through a maze of shell companies and fake charities. Karen Mitchell hadn't just been stealing tools. She'd built an entire black market operation. The community auctions were merely a front for a sophisticated theft ring that stretched across 3 states. The real bombshell dropped when Mike Wilson took the stand. He played an audio recording from an HOA board meeting where Karen explicitly outlined their strategy: target homes with valuable equipment, manufacture violations, then force owners to donate their property or face endless fines and legal harassment. Susan Cooper's testimony was particularly damning. Facing serious prison time, she turned on Karen, revealing how they'd perfected their scheme over years. They would research potential targets months in advance, studying property records and even infiltrating local craftsman groups to identify valuable equipment. Karen had a system, Susan testified, her voice shaking. We'd look for older homeowners, especially those with well-equipped workshops. Once we identified a target, we'd manipulate the HOA bylaws to isolate them. The community property angle was just a cover. We were stealing their livelihoods. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, a well-intentioned community program gone wrong. But their argument fell apart when the prosecution produced Karen's personal notebook, discovered during the police raid. It contained detailed plans for targeting my garage, including sketches of my workshop layout and estimated values for each major piece of equipment. As the evidence mounted, more victims came forward. A retired machinist from Boulder testified about losing his entire collection of precision tools. A woodworker from Colorado Springs described how they'd forced him to donate his grandfather's hand-carved planes. Each story highlighted the human cost of Karen and Susan's greed. The jury deliberation lasted just 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Karen Mitchell received 15 years for racketeering, conspiracy, and grand theft. Susan Cooper got 8 years in exchange for her testimony. The HOA enforcement team members received varying sentences, with Dave Peters and Rick Thompson each getting 5 years for their roles in the break-in. But the criminal verdicts were just the beginning. James Wheeler had prepared civil suits against both Karen and Susan personally, as well as the HOA itself. The evidence from the criminal trial made the civil cases virtually uncontestable. The HOA's insurance company, facing multiple 7-figure lawsuits, quickly moved to settle. The settlement negotiations revealed the true scope of their operation. Over 5 years, they had stolen nearly $2 million worth of equipment. From dozens of homeowners across 3 states, the insurance company agreed to pay full restitution to all identified victims, plus punitive damages. Jim Kelly received enough compensation to replace all his electrical equipment and start his own business. The retired machinist got funds to rebuild his workshop. Every victim identified during the investigation received full compensation for their losses, plus additional damages for harassment and emotional distress. My share of the settlement was substantial, but more importantly, the court granted an injunction permanently barring Karen Mitchell, Susan Cooper, and their associates from serving on any HOA board or holding any position of authority in a residential community. The aftermath transformed Oak Ridge. With Karen and her cronies gone, the HOA underwent a complete restructuring. Bob Martinez led the effort to rewrite the bylaws, ensuring no board could ever again abuse their power so blatantly. The new rules emphasized homeowner rights and limited the HOA's authority to basic property maintenance and community safety. As I stood in my garage that evening, surrounded by the tools that had sparked this whole ordeal, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. My father's workbench still stood where it always had, his initials carved into the corner. These weren't just tools, they were pieces of history, family legacy, and personal achievement. No one had the right to claim them as community property. The rebuilding of Oak Ridge began within days of the verdict. The first order of business was dismantling the corrupt HOA structure Karen and Susan had created. A community meeting was called at the local recreation center with nearly every homeowner in attendance. The tension in the room was palpable. Trust had been severely damaged. Bob Martinez stood at the podium, his years of teaching experience evident in how he commanded the room. "We need to start fresh," he announced. "Not just new rules, but a new philosophy about what community really means." The stories started flowing. Beyond the tool thefts, neighbors began sharing other abuses they'd endured under Karen's regime. The Patels had been fined for cooking Indian food because the spice smell decreased property values. The Hendersons were threatened with liens for installing solar panels without proper aesthetic approval. Each revelation painted a picture of systematic discrimination and control. Mike Wilson, still grappling with his role in exposing the corruption, proposed a radical idea: transparency. Every HOA meeting would be recorded and live-streamed. All financial records would be publicly available. Violation notices would require photographic evidence and board member signatures. Most importantly, any major decisions would require a community-wide vote. The transformation wasn't just administrative. As spring arrived, neighbors who had barely spoken to each other under Karen's reign began organizing community events. Linda and I hosted a weekend workshop in my garage, teaching basic woodworking skills to interested neighbors. The Patels started a monthly community dinner, sharing their cultural cuisine with anyone interested. The Hendersons offered solar panel consultation to others considering sustainable energy. My garage, once the target of theft, became a gathering place for hobbyists and DIY enthusiasts. I started mentoring young people interested in carpentry, teaching them the skills my father had passed down to me. The tools that Karen and Susan had tried to steal were now genuinely benefiting the community, but on my terms, through sharing knowledge rather than forced donation. James Wheeler helped draft new HOA bylaws that explicitly protected homeowners' rights. The document included strong provisions against harassment and abuse of power, with clear procedures for removing board members who violated these rules. Property rights were strongly emphasized, with specific language preventing any future attempts to seize personal property under the guise of community resources. One Saturday morning, as I was teaching a teenager named Alex how to use a lathe, Bob Martinez stopped by with interesting news. Other neighborhoods had heard about our story and were reaching out for advice on preventing similar abuse. Our new HOA structure was becoming a model for reform across Denver. The settlement money from the civil suit was put to good use. Beyond compensating the victims, we established a community improvement fund. Unlike Karen's corrupt scheme, this fund was completely transparent and democratically managed. Projects had to be proposed publicly and voted on by all residents. The first approved project was fitting, a community workshop built properly and legally. We converted an unused storage building near the recreation center into a shared space where residents could work on projects using community-owned tools, purchased legitimately, not stolen. I helped design the layout, incorporating safety features and organizing tools in a way that made sense for shared use. But the most profound change was in how neighbors treated each other. The fear and suspicion that had characterized Karen's reign was replaced by genuine community spirit. People looked out for each other, shared resources willingly, and respected boundaries. When new residents moved in, they were welcomed with open arms and clear explanations of our community's values. 1 year after the verdict, we organized a neighborhood celebration in the park. Looking around at the families enjoying themselves, children playing, and neighbors chatting freely, it was hard to believe how different things had been just 12 months earlier. My garage door was wide open, tools displayed proudly, no longer a target, but a symbol of personal rights and community respect. The appeal process brought unexpected challenges. 6 months into her 15-year sentence, Karen Mitchell's lawyers discovered a technical error in the original warrant. They claimed the security footage from my garage should have been inadmissible due to improper police procedure during the initial investigation. The appeals court granted a hearing, and suddenly our rock-solid case seemed less certain. James Wheeler worked tirelessly to preserve the conviction, but legal technicalities can be unpredictable. After 3 tense weeks of hearings, the court reached a compromise. Karen's sentence was reduced to 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3. The news hit Oak Ridge like a thunderbolt. Susan Cooper was already out on early release due to her cooperation, and now Karen might follow sooner than expected. The old fears started creeping back. Would they try to rebuild their operation? Would other neighborhoods be at risk? My garage security system caught the first sign of trouble on a Tuesday night. A dark SUV cruising past my house, slowing near the driveway. The camera caught the driver's face. Rick Thompson, one of Karen's former HOA enforcers. He'd served minimal time due to a plea deal and was now apparently back in contact with Karen. The next morning, I found a note in my mailbox. The community remembers. Soon. No signature, but the message was clear. They were trying to intimidate us again, even from behind bars. James Wheeler advised installing additional security measures throughout the neighborhood. We set up a community alert system, sharing security camera feeds and suspicious activity reports. The local police increased patrols, well aware of Karen's history and potential for retaliation. Then came the phone calls. Several former victims reported receiving contact from Karen's associates, offering to make things right if they'd testify about misunderstandings in the original trial. It was witness tampering, plain and simple. James documented everything, building a new case. Linda noticed unusual activity on our credit report. Someone had tried opening accounts in our name. Investigation revealed similar attempts against the key witnesses from the trial. Karen was orchestrating a campaign of financial harassment from her prison cell. The turning point came when Mike Wilson received a job offer that seemed too good to be true. A consulting position with a property management firm offering double his current salary. The catch? The company was owned by Karen's sister. They were trying to buy his silence. Mike played along, wearing a wire to the interview, The conversation quickly turned to revising his trial testimony. The evidence was damning. Karen had violated the terms of her imprisonment by attempting to interfere with witnesses. The appeals court was not amused. Not only was Karen's sentence reinstated in full, but new charges of witness tampering and conspiracy were added. The technical error that had granted her appeal became irrelevant in light of her new crimes. She would serve every day of her 15 years, with additional time for the new charges, but the most satisfying victory came from an unexpected source. Karen's sister, caught in the witness tampering scheme, turned state's evidence. She revealed offshore accounts where Karen had hidden proceeds from their equipment theft operation. The money was seized and added to the victim restitution fund. Our neighborhood's resilience had been tested, but we emerged stronger. The attempted intimidation had backfired, bringing the community closer together. We established a legal defense fund to protect against future harassment, ensuring no homeowner would face such threats alone. My garage remained open for teaching and community projects, now a symbol of victory rather than victimization. The tools that Karen had tried to steal twice, first through theft, then through legal manipulation, continued serving their true purpose, building things and building community. Susan Cooper's early release from prison quickly proved to be a mistake. She moved to Riverside Heights, an upscale community 30 miles from Oak Ridge, using her maiden name to slip under the radar. But she couldn't resist falling back into old habits. Within weeks of moving in, she volunteered for the local HOA board. Her pitch was familiar: community improvement through shared resources. This time, she targeted a retired surgeon's collection of specialized woodworking equipment, but Riverside Heights had been warned. Bob Martinez's network of reformed HOA boards had spread the word about Karen and Susan's operation. A resident recognized Susan from the news coverage and alerted both the HOA board and her parole officer. The response was swift and decisive. Her parole officer discovered she had violated multiple conditions, using an alias, attempting to join an HOA, despite court orders, and contacting known associates from the original scheme. The evidence was overwhelming. Security cameras caught her photographing potential targets' garages. Her computer contained updated versions of the same targeting spreadsheets she'd used in Oak Ridge. The parole violation hearing was brief. Susan's carefully constructed facade crumbled as witness after witness testified about her attempted return to crime. The judge was particularly disturbed by her immediate targeting of valuable equipment, showing no remorse or rehabilitation. Back in Oak Ridge, we received news of Susan's return to prison with mixed emotions. Relief, certainly, but also sadness at the waste of a second chance. The tools she had once tried to steal were being used to teach a new generation of craftsmen, while she would spend years behind bars, plotting more thefts. Linda and I discussed the irony over dinner. She could have used her organizational skills for actual community building, Linda mused. Instead, she's back where she started. The sentiment echoed through the neighborhood as word spread. The aftermath of Susan's failed attempt at starting fresh had unexpected consequences. Her arrest made national news, bringing attention to HOA abuse nationwide. Other communities began examining their own boards for similar patterns of harassment and property theft. James Wheeler found himself consulting with homeowners across the country, helping them identify and prevent HOA overreach. The documentation of Karen and Susan's scheme became a case study in property rights seminars. Our security camera setup was studied as a model for community protection. My garage, once their prime target, became a symbol of resistance against HOA tyranny. I regularly hosted workshops for homeowners from other communities, teaching them not just woodworking, but also how to protect their rights and property from unauthorized seizure. The tools that Susan had twice tried to claim as community property were now truly serving the community, but through education and empowerment rather than theft. Each class I taught was a small victory against the mindset that had driven Karen. And Susan's crimes. One afternoon, while teaching a group about lathe work, I received an unexpected visit from Susan's daughter. She had come to apologize for her mother's actions and to understand why the tools had been so important. I showed her my father's workbench, explaining how each mark and dent told a story of craftsmanship and family heritage. Karen Mitchell's time in prison took an unexpected turn when she was assigned to the prison's woodworking program. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had tried to steal my tools was now learning the craft she had attempted to exploit. But something changed during those long hours in the prison workshop. Word reached me through James Wheeler, who maintained contact with the prison administration. Karen had become skilled at woodworking, spending every available moment in the shop. Her work was exceptional, demonstrating a genuine appreciation for craftsmanship that made her past actions even more perplexing. One day, I received a letter from Karen. Inside was a photograph of a beautifully crafted jewelry box, along with a handwritten note. I finally understand what these tools mean. They're not just equipment, they're extensions of the soul. I'm sorry I tried to take that from you. The prison's rehabilitation coordinator reached out, asking if I would consider visiting. Karen wanted to apologize in person and show me what she'd learned. After much consideration and discussion with Linda, I agreed. Walking into the prison workshop felt surreal. Karen sat at a workbench, her orange jumpsuit dusted with sawdust. The woman who had once threatened my livelihood now handled tools with reverence, creating pieces that showed genuine skill and artistry. I was so focused on the monetary value, she admitted, running her hand along a half-finished table. I never understood what these tools really represented. Each one is a story, a skill passed down, a piece of someone's journey. Her voice cracked. I stole more than equipment. I stole people's connections to their past, their future. The rehabilitation coordinator shared statistics showing Karen's progress. She had become a mentor to other inmates, teaching basic woodworking skills and the patience it requires. Her recidivism risk was assessed as minimal, largely due to her newfound passion for the craft. But actions have consequences. Despite her transformation, Karen would serve her full sentence. The damage she had caused couldn't be undone with apologies alone. However, she was working to make amends in whatever way she could. Through her lawyer, Karen provided information about other HOA abuse cases she knew about, helping authorities prevent similar schemes across the state. She wrote a detailed confession, explaining how their operation worked, which became required reading for HOA oversight committees. Back in Oak Ridge, opinions about Karen's transformation were mixed. Some, like Bob Martinez, saw it as proof that rehabilitation was possible. Others remained skeptical, remembering the fear and harassment they had endured. The tools in my garage took on new meaning. They had not only protected my property rights, but had somehow helped reform one of the people who had tried to steal them. Each workshop I hosted now included a discussion about the true value of craftsmanship and community. Linda suggested something unexpected, using Karen's story in our community outreach, not to excuse her actions, but to demonstrate how understanding and respecting skilled trades could transform perspectives. The tools that were once targeted for theft were now teaching lessons about both craftsmanship and redemption. Karen's case had prompted lawmakers to examine HOA regulations statewide. The tools she had once tried to steal were now influencing property rights legislation. A state senator visited my garage to understand the impact of HOA overreach firsthand. Standing among the tools that sparked the controversy, she drafted what would become the Homeowner Protection Act. The law established clear limits on HOA authority and created strict penalties for property rights violations. Karen's prison woodworking program gained attention from rehabilitation experts. They studied how teaching trades could transform perspectives on property and community. The program expanded to other facilities, with released inmates often finding work in carpentry and construction. My security camera footage became a training tool for law enforcement, showing how HOAs could be used as covers for organized crime. Police departments across the state developed specialized units to investigate HOA-related theft and fraud. The tools in my garage continued their journey from targets to teachers. I started a formal apprenticeship program, teaching both woodworking skills and business ethics. Former inmates from Karen's program, now released, sometimes joined as guest instructors, sharing their perspectives on redemption through craft. Linda organized monthly community forums where homeowners shared experiences of HOA abuse and discussed solutions. The meetings, held in our garage among the tools that started it all, helped heal old wounds and build stronger neighborhood bonds. Karen's daughter visited again, this time with news. Her mother had written a book about her experiences. From theft to craft, How Woodworking Changed My Life became required reading in criminal rehabilitation programs. The proceeds went to a victim restitution fund. The transformation spread beyond our community. Other neighborhoods adopted our transparent HOA model, emphasizing homeowner rights and community service over control and conformity. The tools that were once seen as valuable prizes became symbols of positive change. A national documentary crew filmed in my garage, capturing the story of how attempted theft led to community renewal and criminal rehabilitation. Karen participated from prison, demonstrating the woodworking skills that had changed her perspective on property and purpose. James Wheeler established a legal clinic specializing in HOA abuse cases. His office displayed photos of my tools alongside case files, reminding clients that standing up for property rights could spark systemic change. The original security, cameras that caught Karen's crime, now monitored a thriving community workshop. Every project completed there represented a small victory over the greed and entitlement that had driven the theft attempt. The final chapter of our story brought everything full circle. 10 years had passed since the attempted theft of my tools, and Oak Ridge had transformed completely. The garage that was once a target of crime had become a cornerstone of community education and rehabilitation. Karen Mitchell, released after serving her full sentence, made an unexpected request through her lawyer. She wanted to teach at our community workshop. Her decade of prison woodworking had made her highly skilled, and her story carried powerful lessons about respect for craft and property. After careful consideration and community consultation, we agreed to a probationary teaching position. Her first class was tense. Many students recognized her from the news coverage years ago. But as she demonstrated her mastery of the tools she had once tried to steal, skepticism gave way to respect. The original security cameras captured a different scene now. Karen teaching alongside me, showing young craftsmen how to respect both the tools and the traditions they represented. The equipment she had valued only for its resale price now helped her teach valuable life skills. Susan Cooper chose a different path after her release, moving to another state. But her daughter remained involved with our program, documenting how attempted theft had sparked a movement for HOA reform and community rehabilitation. The Homeowner Protection Act had spread to 30 states, with more considering similar legislation. Our garage security footage was still used in law enforcement training, but now, alongside footage of our workshop's success stories, former inmates learning trades that kept them from returning to crime. James Wheeler's legal clinic had expanded nationwide, helping homeowners protect their rights while promoting community-based solutions to HOA disputes. The tools that once needed protecting now protected others through education and empowerment. Linda organized a 10th anniversary celebration, in our garage. Past and present students displayed their work, including pieces by inmates in prison woodworking programs across the country. Karen's jewelry box held a place of honor, symbolizing how craft could transform lives. The documentary about our story aired on national television, inspiring other communities to examine their HOA practices and establish similar workshop programs. Our security camera system, which once caught criminals, now recorded thousands of hours of teaching and learning. As I looked around my garage that evening, surrounded by tools that had sparked such profound change, I realized something important. Sometimes protecting what's yours isn't just about security systems and legal battles. Sometimes it's about showing others the true value of what they tried to take. The story of my garage tools had grown far beyond property rights. It had become a testament to how standing firm against injustice could lead to unexpected healing and growth. The very tools that Karen and Susan had tried to claim as community property had truly become community assets, not through theft, but through teaching, learning, and redemption. The aftermath of our 10-year journey brought unexpected changes that reshaped not just Oak Ridge, but communities across the nation. My garage, once a battleground for property rights, had evolved into something I never imagined, a beacon of hope and transformation for people seeking second chances. One crisp autumn morning, I received a call from a rehabilitation center in California. They had heard about our program and wanted to implement something similar. The tools that Karen had once tried to steal were now inspiring nationwide change. Centers across the country began incorporating trade skills into their recovery programs, using our model as a template. Karen's integration into our teaching staff wasn't without its challenges. Some community members initially protested, remembering the fear and anxiety her actions had caused. But watching her work with students, especially troubled youth, changed many minds. She had a unique way of connecting with those who felt lost, using her own story of transformation to show them a better path. The security cameras that once caught her attempting to steal my tools now recorded her teaching advanced woodworking techniques to a new generation. Her hands, once used to pick locks, now guided students through intricate joinery and delicate finishing work. The transformation was remarkable. Linda's community outreach program expanded beyond our initial expectations. She started a scholarship fund for at-risk youth interested in learning trades, naming it the Second Chance Initiative. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The tools that were almost stolen now funded opportunities for others to learn legitimate craftsmanship. Bob Martinez, in his retirement, wrote a comprehensive guide on community rehabilitation through craftsmanship. The book featured stories from our workshop, including detailed accounts of how working with tools had changed lives. Each chapter began with a photograph of one of the tools Karen had tried to steal, now being used to teach valuable skills. The documentary about our story spawned a series about community transformation through trade education. Film crews regularly visited our workshop, capturing moments of breakthrough as former inmates mastered new skills. The tools that once needed protecting now protected others by providing paths to honest work. James Wheeler's legal practice evolved too. Beyond fighting HOA abuse, he now specialized in helping communities establish their own workshop programs. His office walls displayed before and after photos of transformed spaces, with our garage prominently featured as the program that started it all. Susan Cooper's daughter became an advocate for trade education in prisons, using her mother's story as both a warning and a hope for redemption. She regularly spoke at correctional facilities, sharing how the tools her mother once tried to steal had become instruments of positive change. The Homeowner Protection Act continued to evolve, with amendments specifically promoting community education programs. My garage became a model for others, showing how private property could benefit the community without sacrificing individual rights. As I walked through my garage one evening, each tool seemed to tell its own story of transformation. The table saw that Karen had once planned to sell, now helped veterans learn new skills. The lathe that was almost stolen created beautiful pieces that raised funds for community projects. Linda suggested something profound, hosting a national conference on community rehabilitation through craftsmanship. The garage where this story began would become a gathering place for educators, reformers, and craftsmen from across the country. The conference Linda proposed became a catalyst for even broader change. Over 300 attendees gathered in our expanded community workshop space, which had grown from my single garage to encompass a dedicated building nearby. Representatives from correctional facilities, rehabilitation centers, and community organizations across the country came to learn how a simple garage workshop had sparked a movement. The most powerful moment came when Karen Mitchell and I co-presented the keynote address. Standing beside the very tools she had once tried to steal, she shared her journey from theft to craftsmanship. The audience sat in stunned silence as she demonstrated how working with her hands had transformed not just her skills, but her entire perspective on community and property. Our security camera system, which had evolved into a sophisticated teaching tool, now captured every workshop session for an online learning platform. The same technology that had caught criminals now helped spread knowledge to aspiring craftspeople worldwide. Each video began with a brief reminder of where it all started: a simple garage and an attempted theft that changed countless lives. The rehabilitation program expanded beyond woodworking. We added metalworking, automotive repair, and even 3D printing classes. Each new addition represented another opportunity for people to transform their lives through skilled trades. The tools that were once targets of theft became gateways to legitimate careers. Linda's Second Chance initiative had grown into a national foundation, providing scholarships and startup grants to reformed individuals wanting to establish their own workshops. The foundation's logo featured a simple workbench, a replica of my father's, symbolizing how heritage and craft could bridge divides and heal communities. James Wheeler's legal practice now had offices in 12 states, each one equipped with a small workshop where clients could learn basic skills while fighting their cases. He often said that the best way to protect property rights was to help people understand the true value of craftsmanship. The original HOA building, where Karen and Susan had plotted their schemes, was converted into a trade school annex. Every day, the space that once housed corruption now echoed with the sounds of learning and creation. It felt like poetic justice. The trade school annex's success led to an unexpected partnership with local high schools. What started in my garage had evolved into a comprehensive vocational education program, bridging the gap between traditional education and practical skills. Students who might have fallen through the cracks found purpose in creating with their hands. Karen's rehabilitation program caught the attention of state legislators nationwide. They commissioned a study on the impact of trade education on recidivism rates. The results were staggering. Participants in our program showed an 85% lower rate of return to crime compared to traditional rehabilitation methods. My original security cameras, still mounted in their places of honor, now captured a daily parade of success stories. Former inmates teaching alongside seasoned craftsmen, troubled youth discovering their talents, and community members sharing skills across generations. The tools that once needed protection had become protectors themselves, guarding against the desperation that leads to crime. Linda's vision expanded further. She established satellite workshops in underserved communities, each one equipped with the same careful attention to security and community involvement that had protected my original tools. The security footage from these locations showed similar transformations, people finding purpose through craftsmanship. James Wheeler's legal foundation now included a Tools for Change program, providing essential equipment to reformed individuals starting their own businesses. Each recipient had to complete our workshop program first, ensuring they understood both the practical and ethical aspects of tool ownership. The HOA reform movement sparked by our case had evolved into a national conversation about community, rights and responsibilities. Property ownership was no longer seen as just a legal right, but as a foundation for community building. My garage had become a case study in how protecting individual rights could strengthen collective good. Susan Cooper's daughter established a scholarship specifically for children of incarcerated parents, helping them learn trades that could break the cycle of crime. The program used my garage's story as its cornerstone, showing how understanding the value of work and property could transform lives across generations. The scholarship program, started by Susan Cooper's daughter, blossomed into something extraordinary. One morning, I received a letter from a young man named Marcus, whose father had been part of Karen's original theft ring. He had completed our program and was now opening his own woodworking shop in Chicago. The tools that his father had once tried to steal had guided his son toward an honest living. The national conference Linda organized became an annual event, growing larger each year. During our 10th gathering, we unveiled a museum section in the expanded workshop space. It featured the original security camera footage alongside current recordings, showing the dramatic transformation from attempted theft to community rebirth. The centerpiece was my father's workbench, now surrounded by photographs of hundreds of students who had learned their craft on its weathered surface. Karen's rehabilitation work caught the attention of international organizations. Delegations from Europe, Asia, and Australia visited our facility, studying how a simple garage workshop had evolved into a model for community transformation. Each visitor left with not just ideas, but a deeper understanding of how protecting individual rights could strengthen entire communities. The security system that had once caught criminals attempting to steal my tools now served a different purpose. We used it to create detailed instructional videos, capturing the subtle movements of master craftsmen at work. These recordings helped students understand not just the mechanics of tools, but the respect and care they deserved. Linda's Second Chance initiative expanded to include a business incubator program. Former students could apply for startup funding to establish their own workshops, with mentorship from established craftsmen. The tools that were once targets of theft now generated legitimate businesses across the country. James Wheeler's legal practice evolved into a full-service community development organization. Beyond fighting HOA abuse, they now helped communities establish their own workshop programs, complete with security systems modeled after my original setup. Each new location became another point of light in a growing network of transformation. The Homeowner Protection Act underwent its most significant revision yet, incorporating provisions for community education and rehabilitation programs. Lawmakers who visited our workshop saw firsthand how protecting property rights while fostering community engagement could create lasting positive change. Our workshop's influence reached a pivotal moment when the United Nations included our model in their global study on community rehabilitation. The garage that once faced an attempted theft had become an international blueprint for social transformation. Delegates from developing nations visited regularly, studying how protecting individual rights could build stronger communities. The original security cameras that caught Karen and Susan's crime now served a historical purpose in our museum wing. Next to them, We displayed modern teaching equipment that live-streamed advanced woodworking techniques to satellite locations. Worldwide, the contrast between surveillance and education technology told its own story of transformation. Marcus, the son of one of Karen's former associates, expanded his Chicago workshop into a regional training center. He implemented our security protocols and teaching methods, creating another node in our growing network of rehabilitation through craftsmanship. The tools his father had once targeted for theft now provided opportunities for hundreds of at-risk youth. Linda's Second Chance initiative partnered with major tool manufacturers to create starter kits for program graduates. Each kit included basic equipment and a copy of our comprehensive security guide. The very companies whose tools had once been stolen now actively supported rehabilitation through proper ownership and use. Karen's work with reformed offenders attracted attention from criminal justice experts. Studies showed that participants who completed our program had an almost 0% recidivism rate. The combination of practical skills, mentorship, and respect for property had created a powerful formula for permanent change. James Wheeler's organization established a research division dedicated to studying the long-term effects of community-based rehabilitation. The data they collected showed remarkable results. Neighborhoods with workshop programs experienced significant drops in property crime and increased community engagement. The HOA reform movement we sparked had evolved into a comprehensive model for community governance. Our garage workshop became required reading in urban planning courses, demonstrating how individual property rights could coexist with genuine community benefit. The United Nations study of our workshop model led to an unexpected development, an international conference on property rights and community rehabilitation. Representatives from 50 countries gathered in our expanded facility, now a sprawling campus that had grown from my single garage. The tools that were once targets of theft had become instruments of global change. The conference highlighted success stories from around the world. A program in Brazil had adapted our model to help former gang members learn furniture making. In Kenya, a similar initiative helped young people escape poverty through skilled trades. Each program used our security protocols and teaching methods, modified for local needs, but maintaining the core principle of respect for tools and property. Karen's role had evolved far beyond teaching basic woodworking. She now headed our psychological rehabilitation department, combining craftsmanship with trauma recovery. Her unique perspective as both former perpetrator and reformed craftsperson gave her insights that traditional therapists couldn't match. The security cameras that once caught her attempting theft now recorded her helping others find redemption through skilled work. Linda's Second Chance initiative expanded into virtual reality training. We developed programs that allowed incarcerated individuals to practice woodworking skills safely before handling actual tools. The same technology that had protected my garage now helped prepare people for legitimate careers in trades. Marcus's Chicago Center became a model for urban rehabilitation. His success inspired similar programs in Detroit, Baltimore, and Los Angeles. Each location incorporated our security measures and teaching philosophy, creating a network of transformation centers across America's cities. The tools that his father had once tried to steal now provided hope in some of the country's most challenged neighborhoods. James Wheeler's research division published groundbreaking studies on the connection between property respect and community healing. Their findings influenced criminal justice reform nationwide, promoting trade education as an alternative to traditional incarceration. The same legal system that had punished Karen and Susan now actively supported rehabilitation through craftsmanship. The HOA reform movement we inspired had grown into a complete reimagining of community governance. Property rights were now seen as foundational to community strength rather than obstacles to be overcome. Organizations worldwide studied our transition from conflict to cooperation, seeking to replicate our success in their own communities. Our annual conference now included a Future of Craft exposition, showcasing how traditional tools could be integrated with modern technology. Virtual reality training systems operated alongside century-old workbenches, demonstrating how respect for craft transcended technological boundaries. The security system that once protected against theft now facilitated global learning networks. Up next, don't miss 2 more incredible stories that will inspire and amaze you. If this journey of transformation touched your heart, you'll want to discover what's coming next. Click through to continue exploring these remarkable tales of change and renewal.